At T-Mobile for Business, unconventional thinking means we see things differently, so you can focus on what matters most. That's why we've become the leader in 5G, #1 in customer satisfaction, and a partner who includes 5G in every plan, so you get it all. Unconventional thinking is better for business. Open Signal awards T-Mobile as America's fastest 5G network USA. 5G user experience report July 2021. Capable device required. Coverage not available in some areas. Some uses may require certain plan or features. See T-Mobile.com. For JD Power 2020 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Cybercrime is on the rise and digital security is more important than ever. Sophos Home Antivirus will protect you against malware and viruses such as keyloggers from stealing your personal information while you shop online this season. Get protected and shop safely online this holiday season with Sophos Home. Visit sophos.com/home to learn more and get 25% off. That's Sophos, SOPHOS.com/home.
Welcome to No Cartridge Audio. My name's Trevor Strunk, Hagelbont on Twitter, and I have with me 3 guests, which is an entirely unreasonable amount of guests. You might call this the worst of all possible worlds, as we are joined by the podcast hosts of the lovely new podcast. You guys are still new, right? Would you say you're still new?
Fresh little
pretty
babies.
New? Okay, I think so. Well, I think once you have Scott on, they've had Scott Benson on. So if you like those episodes, go listen to his episode there. I think Scott's episode's very good. It deals with everyone's favorite thing, Christian ephemera. That was meant to.
And really, when we had Scott on, that was when we arrived. Yeah. Honestly,
taking us right to the top.
It always is.
That Castles and Cauldrons episode.
Oh, yeah.
He's a kingmaker. That's what's important about Scott.
The Benson bump, they call it.
That's and we're not talking pregnancy, everyone. Although spontaneous pregnancies are known to happen just out of sheer joy of being around Scott Benson.
While playing Night in the Woods, actually, about midway through, you're just instantly pregnant.
Tragic pregnancies, but in the end, sort of bittersweet.
Oh, very bittersweet.
That's nice.
There's also a Lovecraftian monster midway through. It's great.
What do you think they're
kind
pregnant
of like
with?
if anyone's lived with a pregnant person before, you'll know that that's not too far off. About the baby, not them. They're lovely.
My sister just had a baby. It's very exciting. I'm an uncle now. Did I tell you about that, Trev?
Oh, you have real proud uncle vibes,
yeah,
Josh.
well, that's what I am for. I get to also meet my niece in a few weeks for Thanksgiving. Very excited.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, congratulations, and we'll introduce you first. This is Josh Borman. You've been on the show a couple times, or at least once.
I think once, yeah. I came on. We talked about Civ. This was like a while ago.
I don't think I've heard that.
Yeah, this was in the period of time where I would talk to people about like 4X and strategy games enough that people, and I still like talking about them when it comes up, but they had a moment, and I was talking with people about them so much that like all of a sudden people thought I was good at those games. I'm not. So, like I think on the first 24-hour stream I had, Brace Belden came on and played Hearts of Iron 4 with me, and it was the most sort of like inept and like manic, weird experience I think anyone that has been on Twitch ever. It's just like, an hour of people ranting about what's really going on, while like we're like moving things around and being like, how do you play a strategy game? But yeah, so no, that was fun, and you're also the person who has set up most of my live shows, except that one brief live show that I had in my basement, just my 2 kids. I recorded a brief episode on the politics of the videos they were watching on YouTube.
For that one, that was
real small turnout on that one. Actually, that was rough. I think my basement isn't ready for prime time. But Josh has set up the rest of my shows, a caveat at all, and is a valued friend. So always nice to have you on the show. But today we have 2 more people on the show. I feel like you guys should introduce yourselves, because I can introduce Josh because Josh has been here before. Yeah. But you guys should probably have the the honor yourselves.
Yeah, Brian, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Brian Alford. I guess I edit the podcast and co-host, of course. And I made a single YouTube video last year, and I can't stop talking about that, of course.
Cool.
And
how'd it do? Did it do numbers?
no, not really.
It did not do numbers.
For us, it did numbers. Oh,
Yeah,
boy, for
yeah.
us, it sure did.
This was back
It
when
was
we
a
were still
running
trying
hit.
to make the YouTube thing work, which does not work long distance when I'm in New Mexico and no one else is. But
It's literally just you. They've actually emptied out New Mexico.
yeah, no, it's me and a bunch of petrified wood. Really,
Living the dream.
yeah, it's no way to run a state, but I'm gonna keep doing it this way.
Brian Alford, king of New Mexico.
I like that you are enthusiastic about the podcast because I find that, so I have a theory about podcasts that I've never really shared, but since as soon as you get 4 people into a room to podcast, it just becomes a vibe as opposed to an episode. So now's the time to unleash my theories. I have a theory that most podcasts end at episode 4. And the reason most podcasts end at episode 4 is because there's one person on the podcast who does both is both a co-host and the producer. And at some point, they get mad at the other 2 or 3 or whoever because they are doing as much work as they are, right? Like, you sort of look at it and you're like, well, you get to bump in and speak, and then I have to do the work. And I was just both of those people. My self-loathing kept this train rolling until I could hire a producer.
I think that's really what it is if your self-loathing overpowers your loathing of other people that you work with, you can keep going.
Well,
And
Brian,
there's
how-
never any point where my hatred of anyone else will ever steamroll my self-loathing.
Well, how long is it
Wonderful.
going to be, though, before you snap and kill AJ and I?
I probably wouldn't kill AJ and you. I'd probably no. I'm not going to complete this.
No,
sentence
just me.
because it would
Just me.
It would
He
break
would
some
just
federal
kill me.
laws. But
Don't give them tips.
I can't wait till this comes up
I
in
mean,
my
you know-
murder trial.
You'd have to drive all the way across the country. I feel like your rage would quell. Like there's that story about the astronaut who drove like the whole way to kill her.
Yeah.
Her I forget if it was a cheating girlfriend or boyfriend. I
It
can't
was
remember.
some
But,
sort of. I don't even know if they were cheating or
was
if
a
it was
tryst.
just like
Yeah,
they had
it
been
might have been an
divorced
obsession.
for a while, and then she was like, "I'm going to do this," and then she diped up and shat herself across the country.
What?
Yeah,
That's
didn't
right.
they make a Kristen Stewart movie about that? Wasn't?
I think she was in that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
they
was
at least
the,
made
that was the
something
third
about it.
Twilight movie. That's what that was based on.
That was.
But no, that was. I mean, that's like there's some real heavy commitment there, and I think the real lure of that story outside of the diaper is that
The diaper is the
there
primary
sort-
allure of the story, to be clear.
I mean, look, it's like how the DC Sniper, when that was all happening,
man.
the real kicker was like, oh, are they a father and son? That's like, I've seen this movie.
Yeah.
Like this is a coming of age story.
In many ways, the podcast is my diaper because what else would I be doing?
and you're filling it with ideas.
I'm a year and a half into being a
this is the
completely unemployed immersive theater actor, and that industry is just like not gonna come back except for like the most psychotic freaks. So I had to dipe up somehow.
But hey, we got we got content, right?
Yeah.
That's what matters. At the end of the day, we're generating high quality content.
Yeah, and when life hands
Josh,
you a
if
diaper,
you keep saying
make
that,
shit.
Brian will snap. That's basically you are. Do not poke the producer. In my understanding. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for putting up with me there. And AJ, you're next.
Yeah.
Mr. AJ
Hi,
Diddy.
I'm AJ, and I also made a video for our YouTube channel that did significantly worse than Brian's.
Yeah.
So
This was one in the lead up to it. Josh and I thought like this is going to be the thing that makes the channel take off. This is like the most commercially like appealing thing.
Accessible
it's not just about
idea.
it's not just about an old Japanese horror movie and a Friedrich Dürrenmatt short story, nor is it about like a single event that happened in January of like 2018. It was a video about Quest 64 and why it failed. And also
It failed because it was bad. I didn't watch the
dealing,
video.
yeah,
but
yeah.
That's
and
correct.
dealing with death. and the whole concept of death and how it relates to the death of the grandmother that AJ had a bad relationship with, who gave him that game, which didn't help the relationship at all.
I think it's really charming. And I do find your podcast charming in a very real way. That is not me being condescending. I find it charming. And I think one of the reasons I find it charming is because your instinct in thinking about commercial viability is like maybe only matched by my own bad instincts in considering commercial viability.
But this is why we vibe. This is why we vibe.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, it's you're like the impulse there to say like, ugh, no one wants to watch a YouTube about like obscure Japanese movies and short stories. And definitely they don't want hyper-specific history. What they want is a loving tribute to an N64 clunker that is tied to the concept of mourning. Yeah. No, you're right.
I even hearing you describe it back to me, I'd still watch the shit out of that video essay.
Yeah.
And
we really are following our passion.
That's the thing.
You're building an audience
it's a shame
of like
the
the
internet
most,
did
like,
not
the most
follow
dedicated.
that passion.
I stand by all of the stuff that we've created so far. I think that Brian's video was really good. I think that AJ's video was really good, and I think that the first one that I did was good too. It's just a matter of finding an audience, and that's the challenge of any like fucking media brand or whatever the hell.
Have you considered releasing videos that are like 15 things you missed about...
Have you ever considered sucking my dick?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's why podcasts...
15 things I've thought about.
Podcasts kind of turned out to be a nice way to keep making things without as many constraints. Because a video, we want it to be polished. We want it to be good. And podcasts don't have to be good. People just listen to them no matter how bad they are.
Listen, I'm here to tell you they do not need to be good. I've been riding that train for a long time.
Gravy train, baby. Let's go.
But AJ, I totally cut off your introduction, and then we'll get to the point of this episode.
Yeah, no, I'm also a playwright and an actor, and the theater industry, I think, as Brian has alluded to before, not just the immersive theater industry, but all of the theater industry pretty much imploded in 2020, and we were all looking for some sort of creative outlet. Nothing. It was, there was some sort of calamity happened outside my house, and I played a lot of Animal Crossing and made a nightmarish horror story about it on my Instagram. But
AJ is probably the only person to design a narrative for Instagram and do so in over the course of 16 months at this point.
Yeah,
a long-running series about the island of Dr. Moreau, but presented through Animal Crossing: New Horizons.
Yeah,
you're like the Zoomer Marble Hornets.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a millennial by far and away.
I meant
wish I
Marble
could
Hornets for Zoomers.
Oh, yeah. I see. Yes, good. Maybe, I don't know. Do Zoomers use Instagram anymore? That's sort of my question. I thought everyone had sort of migrated to TikTok.
No, they use Instagram. They use Instagram. They use Snap. What they don't use is Facebook.
They're all on Weibo. From what I understand, the Zoomers are all using Weibo.
Yeah, and
they're all on Peach. Peach is back, and the Zoomers are using it.
Oh, thank God.
What is Peach? I don't even know.
Remember?
I don't know either.
Is that like Friendster?
It was like a flash. It was a flash in the pan Twitter killer. There was also that one app where you could just click
now.
Yeah.
We're all just hanging out on Mastodon.
Remember the Hey app?
Hanging out on Donald Trump's Mastodon instance.
Oh no, the Yo. It was the Yo app.
Yo.
Oh yeah,
Yo.
You yo'd at people. That was the
But you didn't do anything else, right?
That was the only thing you could do was send a Yo. Yeah.
We all messed
what
up
NFTs
by going away from
are.
Yo.
NFTs aren't not the Yo app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we might get in trouble describing what NFTs are.
Well, I thought I was
AJ,
under the impression
please.
that this podcast episode was exclusively an NFT. I thought it was only being released as an NFT.
It'll be sold for.
We're going to put a lot of really
18
racist
Ethereum
stuff in the middle and then sell it to Elijah Wood.
He
I'm selling it to Martin Shkreli to sell to Elijah Wood.
There we go. I think we've hit all the big ones.
All right.
That's it. Yeah, this is everyone's bingo card is full.
We can go home now. It's all done.
That's it. We're done.
We have just
So, AJ,
revealed
did you
everyone
switch
as
to-
much of the story of Final Fantasy 15 as they would experience if they played the full game.
That's true. They'll have to pay for the other episodes where we actually talk about the main plot of Final Fantasy 15.
They're on your Patreon feed, which in a lot of ways feels a little strange, but
It is an anime, though, so that's fun. It's an anime podcast.
that's true. Yeah. So did you are you not in the theater anymore? Or are you sort of just like pivoting entirely to podcasts?
No, actually,
or are
funnily
you sort
enough, my play is going up next year in New York.
All right.
It was just staged up in New Hampshire. We did production in Derry, New Hampshire, and then in Boston for
Way to go.
2 weekends. And then we're transferring that to New York sometime next year.
as the son of an actor, like someone who has somehow made a living out of being a full-time actor for his life, I support anyone doing that. It's cool.
It's a. it is a terrifying profession, but it is a very rewarding one.
Thankless is the word I would give to it, but yeah, it's very nice
yes,
once you
correct.
actually once you can see something you've done out there. It's really cool.
Is your dad still out there acting, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, here and there. I think less since COVID, and he's been dealing with some other stuff. Not his own health problems, but family stuff. He's quite healthy, actually. Probably healthier than me, but not
I remember I met him. He came out to one of the live shows.
I think he was at one or two of the live shows.
Yeah,
he still acts when he can. I think he runs a regional theater out of Milford, New Jersey, which is great because there's not a lot of regional theaters around there. But that was much bigger at a certain point, and now it's a lot of seasonal stuff. It's really good. They do great stuff. It's funny because they'll just put on a union level performance of the Christmas Carol, brilliant acting for in a town, which is very funny. But they do that still. I'm sure once they can, they'll do more. I know he ended up doing a lot of simulation work and consulting too. But anything to keep the bills in. Now he actually, funny enough, does a podcast too, called the Liars Club Oddcast with some writing friends of his. So it's good.
Awesome.
Trevor's dad on Worst of All Possible Worlds.
Yeah.
If you want someone to talk about something that is I bet he would talk to you about. I mean, there's so many things. I'll get in touch.
What does he think about Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet?
Oh boy.
Oh,
because we've already talked about
Kenneth
on
Branagh's
the
Hamlet.
podcast.
I'm such a.
Did you listen to the podcast episode where we talked about Ethan Hawke's Hamlet?
I missed that one. I missed the one about Hamlet.
We avoid most of it for talking about Branagh's Hamlet, because if we ever do an episode on Branagh's Hamlet, it will be so many hours of us just being very mad at everything, every single part of it.
I'm funny because I'm funny with Branagh's Hamlet because I'm absolutely I don't come into it from a thespian's perspective. My sister was much more the theater, apple falling from that tree. She got a theater anthropology degree, and now she's a theater anthropologist. So no, she doesn't. She works in an office. No, she works in an office. She's very happy though. But she was a good actor, and it is a good actor, I'm sure. But I was fair. So I never really focused that way, but I like Branagh's Hamlet because it has all the speeches in it, so I can sort of teach it if I need to. I could be don't worry, we got the folio version here. We got Q1, we got Q2, we got the folio, we got every speech, everything's in here, and I like that he was just you know what? I'm not making any choices. They're all in.
I would argue that he makes a lot of choices and all of them wrong.
Well, I do like this thesis about a choiceless Hamlet, though.
I do too.
I want to run with that.
Because speaking of Hamlets with unlimited choices, Final Fantasy 15.
Yeah, okay, so the episode today is about Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasies in general, but 15 in specific because Brian and AJ, this is the one you've spent the most time with.
Yeah.
So much of my life.
Perhaps unadvisedly, there are other Final Fantasies out there.
There are.
There are. This was my first. So
Well,
Oh.
it's a Final
Yeah, this is a
Fantasy
weird one to
for
start with.
first timers.
I was about to say the
newcomers and whatever.
exact same thing.
Yeah.
Newcomers
It says
and
it.
long timers are.
you boot it up,
lie.
it says it, and you can't skip it. You have
It's
to
the
stare at
first-
that
Every time you fire that
says.
game up, it's like, hey, newcomer, hey, old timer, this game's for both of you.
Now, I will say I've played this game a while back under the request of Mr. Ed Zitron, who you may know from Twitter. Nice gentleman. We all like him here. This and Horizon Zero Dawn. I haven't actually gotten to Horizon Zero Dawn yet. I'm behind on that, but I've played Final Fantasy 15, and like I will admit, I did not play, let's say, all of it, but a lot of it. And like the thing about Final Fantasy 15, I think it's funny if it is your first Final Fantasy game, is it really tries to be different in almost a way that like you could see some sort of like Final Fantasy spin-off being like Final Fantasy Adventures or Tactics. Like, oh, Adventures, we're like having a little more fun. Like it's a little kind of jokey. Like it's, it's kind of cuter. We have like super deformed characters or whatever, right? Like, and then you go like, oh, like Tactics, that's going to be sort of like high state stuff. Like, cause it's strategy battles. And this you could be like, oh, it's like, or like X2 and X3, or X2 particularly is like, oh, like the babes from X are now like Charlie's Angels, and it's like they're having fun together, and it's like an empowerment game. And it's like, oh, cool. None of these are really Final Fantasy, but they kind of have those bones, and I like it. Like this is basically like Final Fantasy, like Lowrider or something like that. Like it's like. It's just like Final Fantasy if you were just hanging out with your dudes.
Yep.
It's the most
it's a vibe
dudes
game.
rock JRPG of any kind, I think. It's an extremely dudes rock kind of game.
Yeah, it's funny because any of the other dudes rock JRPGs I've ever played, like the Shin Megami Tensei games, have extreme dudes rock energy.
absolutely.
But those are all just about the world ending and you being a part of it.
I played Shin Megami Tensei 4, the 3DS game, and that is an aggressively dudes rock game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, even your friend who's like not a dude in that game.
Is a
has
dude and is
extraordinary
rocking.
dudes rock energy.
and you've got like obviously this is not a podcast to talk about Shin Megami Tensei 4, but
It could be.
It could be something.
Watch out.
Well, actually, we'll have to spin
I've
this
only-
off. And
I've
you
only
have to
played Devil
purchase
Survivor,
that
so that's it.
podcast.
Sure. I think it's relevant. Both Shin Megami Tensei and Persona. It's relevant insofar as like obviously these are what are typically seen as exemplars of the JRPG, right? In different ways, and that's kind of the genre that I think that Final Fantasy 15 tried to get away from in a few ways, and I think largely failed due to the weight of the franchise itself. As well as just sort of, I guess, all the historical baggage that's associated with this type of game.
Well, and I think it was buried under the stuff that was part of this specific game's development because they worked on it for a decade.
There were so many chefs in this kitchen, and all of them were screaming at once, "I've come up with a new recipe."
So
Well, yeah, I mean, like you look at Square from like 11 on. I mean, we're lucky we got 12, which is a good game. Like 11 on is just like it's 11 was its own thing and actually a success in many ways, but 13 and then into it's just
so
a million times Square is like, well, I guess we have to ditch this game, like, Final Fantasy Omega or whatever we're calling it, and like kick that can down the road. Now it's Final Fantasy 13.
That was the weird thing. They made a 13-2.
And a 13-3, right? It was like Lightning's Revenge or something.
Lightning Returns.
Yeah. But like my experience with Final Fantasy, it is like the big pillar or whatever, but I grew up playing Nintendo consoles. And
such a funny thing to hear, like from like someone who's probably older than you, which is like that you were playing Nintendo consoles when Final Fantasy for up until 7 was
right.
The Nintendo.
But we also
RPG.
didn't have the home consoles until like GameCube. So we had like a Game Boy. So like I played spin-offs like Sword of Mana, Chrono Trigger when that came on the DS, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which is a wonderful game.
Chrono Trigger, interestingly, and I'm just saying this because I got yelled at for not knowing enough about Assassin's Creed when I went on Chapo. Interestingly enough, not a Final Fantasy spin-off.
Well, yeah, I guess it's not really a spin-off, but it also, like, it is a spin-off. I mean, come on. What else are we going to
It's nothing to do with the universe. They're two entirely different universes.
But yeah, but they're
turn-based
all
RPGs, if that's what you're looking for.
It's made by...
No, but they're not, though.
It uses the same battle system.
It's not.
It uses the little speed meter thing that was pioneered by Final Fantasy and used by nobody else.
I'm amazed. I'm really impressed by your bold thesis that all JRPGs are like.
No.
It's like the. It's like the all JRPGs before 1999 are all part of the
That's
same
not
series.
what I'm saying. I'm saying Chrono Trigger
all ones before
specifically,
1999, and also the Xbox exclusive Lost Odyssey. That one is also set in the same.
Am I right? I thought that Chrono Trigger was sort of this like product of some of the best developers working on both Dragon Quest and the Final Fantasy games coming together.
It's definitely kind of a superstar project, but like you're looking. I mean,
so I think that's a spin. In my head, that's a spin-off, and I'm never going to listen to anyone else's opinion.
It's a super group essentially, right?
Yeah,
like,
okay.
I just finished watching the charming Hulu exclusive Only Murders in the Building, and now I'm saying that is a spin-off of the hit comedy
Electronic
Clifford.
is a spin-off of the
I won't
band
disagree
New
with you,
Order.
yeah.
I think it's cool how Nicholas Winding Refn did more with the guy from Drive in Only God Forgives. I think it's neat that he made him like a dove.
It's a parallel universe spinoff. I don't see any trouble.
Yeah.
This all makes sense.
It's an isekai. It's an isekai.
Technically, every game is a parallel reality spin-off of every other game.
If you think about
in the
it,
multiverse,
damn, dude.
Yeah.
What about the fucking
fellas? Is it a spin-off to play with a controller?
Every game is actually just a spin-off of Death Stranding.
Yeah, everything is a Strand type game at its core.
I was going to mention Death Stranding with this because I think what's funny about this game is, had it come out when 13 was supposed to come out, I think it would have made kind of an interesting splash, and more interesting than 13, which everyone hated. People didn't like 13. It wasn't a super successful game
because it was corridors up until like the final 10 hours or so, and then it opened up.
Yeah.
But it was just like corridor after corridor after corridor. That's the main critique I remember hearing about 13.
Yeah, everyone's saying
apparently 13, 2, and 3 are like pretty fun, and I think probably that's because they realized we should have done that open world thing that everyone likes.
But you know what they
prior
put
to
back
the last
into 15 was corridors for a 2.5 hour segment where you as Noctis are just like wandering around a facility, occasionally getting jump scared. Like,
where's Prompto?
Where is Prompto? Oh, he's in the snow, I think, at that point, right? He's in the snow on his little snowmobile, upgrading his snowmobile.
Because once you get to that facility, I think that's when he's been captured and they're torturing him like Han Solo somewhere.
Yeah, but that's not in the DLC.
And the Prompto DLC is like, you're in the snow, you're hanging out. Also, this happened, and we're still not going to explain it. He's there now.
Yeah.
I have to ask, I don't remember this part of the game. Do you have to slam on the A button, Metal Gear Solid style, to try and free Prompto from being tortured? Like when Solid Snake, you have the quick time action?
Whoever was there is just gone, and you just walk up and let him free.
Yeah, it's super easy.
Cool.
After wandering around that corridor for so long, you just walk in, it's like, oh, I guess we did it, and then you're out of the facility. Like, there's no boss. It's just like, oh, cool, we escaped somehow.
But like, I think if Final Fantasy 13 was this game, there would have been something kind of interesting about it because like it is so different than 12. It was different than stuff that was coming out when 13 came out. But when it came out, like I'm pretty sure Death Stranding came out after it. I'm almost positive.
I think so.
In fact, I am 100% positive now that I'm thinking about it. But they're close enough together that like people playing 15 and thinking like, oh, cool, like a game where I roam around with my friends. You look at Death Stranding, you're like, oh, actually, this is a game about roaming places. Like this is, for better or worse, all my, love-hate elements of Death Stranding. I think the gameplay is fantastic. That's a big love. And part of that is like, it's just chilling. Like you don't have to do anything. You can go anywhere you want. Like there's no timelines or anything. Just go do your
And
stuff.
every once in a while, like Ghost with an acoustic guitar just pops it in and goes.
Yeah, and that's
And then
just a
sometimes
plus
your
to me.
controller
That's-
cries.
It screams at you. Don't you want to play a game where your controller screams at you?
It turns out that yes,
Yeah.
I do. I
Yeah.
want more of that.
Me too.
We all knew that when we were playing with our DSs back, or not DSs, our Dreamcast back in
Exactly.
the day. One of those little controllers could come out. We could make them like little
I
arcade.
think I think that to the point of like wanting a new experience or whatever. That's something that's interesting to me too about this, because that's the idea again that they so desperately wanted to go for. Is this is new, and we joked about it earlier, but it's a Final Fantasy for newcomers and old timers. Or what is the exact language? Because it's so funny. I
For
need
Final
to-
Fantasy fans and first timers.
Final
There we
Fantasy
go.
fans and first timers.
That's very
It's
square.
so square.
Yeah.
That's so Squeenix
Yeah.
to me.
Well,
But,
so
it's-
this game started out as like an antithesis. They were going to make Final Fantasy 13, and then they were going to make Final Fantasy Versus 13, and they were gonna there was going to be something about them that I don't know complements each other or whatever.
Well, they were supposed to be a boy band at one point. Is
Oh.
that true? They were supposed to be like.
I don't.
like
I
roaming the
know that like
countryside, singing songs.
when you
Doesn't
look at the
surprise me,
original
yeah.
teaser for Versus 13, there's a lot more in there that's represented in the final game than you would think. It has the whole warping sword thing.
It has a
It
quote
seems
from
like
Hamlet.
a lot of
It
the
opens with a quote from
broad,
Hamlet.
the broad
Brownouts
story
Hamlet?
beats are
Brownouts
still there. Whatever those broad story beats are, because I still don't know. I've spent so much time reading these like wikis and playing the game and playing the DLCs, and I have no idea what happens in this game. Like, not
I
a
think
clue.
what's weird about this.
Well, no,
What's weird about this game? So, like, I was recently reintroduced to this game before this podcast because Final Fantasy XIV, which I am hopelessly in the tank for, had a rerun of the event that happened when Final Fantasy 15 came out, and the basic idea is some nefarious person sends Noctis into the world of Final Fantasy XIV. And you in the world of Final Fantasy XIV, which is a much more sort of like fairly traditional fantasy world with technological elements. There's no cars and stuff
No
flying
cell
around,
phones.
but sometimes you'll get like there's like there's no cell phones. You'll get what are they like like the mecha that are in all these games where like I should be remembering this. I'm gonna kick myself later. But like basically it's the same thing. Like there's some robots that are bad, but there's a lot of like open country too. Like Noctis drops in here and you have to help him out because his car breaks down and like you have to help him get home. And if you play the whole thing, you get to get the car as a mount eventually. Which, listen, I mean, not only can you get the car as a mount, not only can it fly.
Oh, yeah, you get the flying car?
but
Cool.
you can. Yeah, you invite all your friends in the car and they can drive in there too. So I mean, look, I was there for that. I wanted to do it. And it was so strange seeing Noctis there because I could believe there was sort of like a down and out sort of like dirtbag teen, like, Yu Yu Hakusho without any of the supernatural stuff. Like just driving around in like a beat up car or a nice car that is like sort of past its prime. And like then he's like, yeah, I'm the king, and I need to see my love, who is trapped for 10,000 years. And like I was like, wait, no, you can't do both. You can't do the thing where like he's like a jaded teen, but also he's the king of a certain land, and he needs to like find his love.
Yeah.
And like one of the characters in there's like, I hope you get to find your love. It's so romantic. And like, yeah, that makes sense in Final Fantasy 14, but like, why am I saying it this like? This tough. What's going on?
Yeah, it's a huge failure, I think, on the part of the characterization of Noctis, in that they thought that he was Hamlet, and that it's made clear in sort of the first teaser trailer that they open it with a quote from Hamlet. Your father is killed at the hands of your great 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 uncle. There is it basically follows the same story beats. The love of your life is killed by drowning. so on and so forth. Like they really tried to
Throw
like
flowers at her at
stabbed her.
first.
I'm pretty sure he stabs her.
And then he threw her into the water, right? I think the water killed her. I don't know. Like it's tenuous, right? Like it feels like the connections to Hamlet
For
at this
legal
point are
purposes,
much
it
more
will be the
tenuous
water that
than when they
kills
started. But the failure of the game is that actually this should have been Henry IV adaptation. This should have been Prince Hal traveling the world with his with literally
his
3
dudes.
Falstaffs.
Yeah.
You know, just trying to figure out what makes a good king, because this game has such a hard on for the monarchy anyway. Why not do the Shakespeare play that has the biggest hard on for the monarchy of all of them? You know.
But it's like they've already done that in Final Fantasy Tactics in a certain way, right? Like this game does fall into the like. I mean, Final Fantasy Tactics isn't lighthearted, but Rams is basically like, oh, I don't know how to be a good leader, and like all his friends are around him. They're like, "Don't worry, buddy, you're the best." I guess that's more Henry V. But it's this sense of like everything's been done in Final Fantasy, which sometimes works.
Yeah.
Like in Final Fantasy 14, the element of that is like they just constantly bring in elements from the other games, and they're like, remember this thing that you liked? Like, well, let's do another spin on it, and everyone cheers. It's like a good version of the metaverse. Or like, even in like some of the classic ones, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, when they're just like, oh, like we had so many ideas. Like, what if we kind of made them cooler and more fleshed out? And everyone's like, all right, sounds good.
That's an interesting point too about 7 Remake, right? Because one of the things that to me is one of the reasons that I just full disclosure too, like when we were talking, Trevor, about like what could we come on your show to talk about, part of the reason Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy in general jumped into my head is that I know that both Brian and AJ have pretty strong opinions about it. And I also have an opinion about Final Fantasy, which is I fucking hate it. Like I've tried to get into it as a franchise numerous times.
But you're treating it as a franchise. That's the problem. It is a loose thread of ideas.
But I think like the individual games, just speaking from the experience of like the main games that I've played, because I've liked the spin-offs, like Chrono Trigger, which is a spin-off. The main games, I've played
to get
4.
such letters.
I played a lot of 3. I even played a little bit of 7 until after you get out of the city, and I thought that whole section was fantastic. But it completely loses me every single time.
But that's where I'm going
Unlike
with this,
other
right?
JRPGs.
Is that they need an editor, and they can never find a fucking editor. I don't know why it is, and I think some of it comes back to the fact that there are so many creatives who have so many ideas, and they throw it at the wall to see what sticks, but it just never works.
Well, I also think that there's sort of a fundamental like split in like storytelling from Western to Eastern cultures. There is value to repetition in Japanese storytelling that is not necessarily what we in an American mindset would view as good storytelling.
Yeah, but I think compared to
really...
other JRPGs, though, there is something about what Final Fantasy does that is like particularly turgid.
Yeah, I was going to say my issue
doesn't reflect in
expand on
the,
turgid, Brian.
That doesn't reflect.
Never. No.
My issue is not
doesn't
to
reflect
do
in some of their spin-offs, and it
family
doesn't
show.
reflect in the Tales games, for instance, which I think are generally pretty delightful.
You realize the Tales games are not Final Fantasy spin-offs.
Tales
No,
games
that's
also
not what I'm
very
saying.
long.
I'm saying because they're just other JRPGs.
I was like, oh no, another controversy.
No, because they are a
Breath of
completely
Fire, the
separate
other
thing.
wonderful thing.
Or like Pokemon games, which have mostly gotten irritating at this point, but. It's not the same as Final Fantasy. There is something about Final Fantasy that seems to be in all of the mainline games that I've played, at least, where it's just like I don't fucking care anymore. It just.
So I think like one of the things that I wrote a book. No one's heard about it yet. I never talk about it. But so you guys are the first. So I wrote this book. Don't read it. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Everybody buy the book. Pre-order the book. It's available now.
Yeah, go buy the book. Yeah, story mode available at all fine retailers. If you order it now, you might get it before me.
Wow.
You never know. Some people are. The supply chain's wild right now.
Yeah, there's a paper shortage.
But well, not for my book. It's a paper shortage because they use it all. Yeah. I mean, I did put 800 blank pages in the back as a kind of
That was
statement.
pretty fucked up of you to do, but I'm proud of you for doing it.
But no. So like my chapter on Final Fantasy was really interesting because like for me to write, because like, I mean, I hope it's interesting to read too, but to write, it was really interesting because like I went into it thinking a lot of the stuff we were thinking now, which is like, how much does this actually cohere as a series, right? Like there's not repetition in terms of like, you know, we're not playing the same characters or whatever. There's, you know, like there are JRPGs or sort of like adventure games like the Wise series, YS, Wise. I never know how to say it.
Yeah,
is it Ease? Okay. Wonderful games. I've played a few of them. I just don't know how to say them. But always about the same people, pretty much. Like always, like the recurring adventures of these two people. The Tales games in terms of Tales of like there's the Tales of Symphonia and Tales of Zestria and Tales of etc. And then there's the Tales of Cold Steel games. There's like more coherent elements in there as well as you point out, Brian. But like one of the things I noticed about Final Fantasy when I started looking into it was like, much like the Dragon Quest games, it really was trying to like mimic the experience you get playing Dungeons and Dragons. And like basically there's like two things that like are constantly at odds in Final Fantasy games that they're always trying to tweak to get perfect, which is the one thing they would try to tweak to get perfect is they want to get it just enough that you're doing like that you feel like you're controlling the adventure, and then just enough that you're getting a story, right? Like, so you get to be Noctis, but like you also get to imbue Noctis with some certain personality traits if you want, or like you get to, you get the idea. But then there's also throughout the series, there's this back and forth and balance between high fantasy and technology. And that really starts to come about in a little bit in 2, or I'm sorry, in 4, but mostly in 6, which was released in America's 3.
Right.
And it's like the sine qua non for a lot of people of the series. And that really marries it together because it's the point of the game. Like it's, you know, the whole conflict of that game is a fantasy world essentially is getting crushed by a ravenous empire that uses mecha and like, you know, you're trying to fight it. And then from then on, this balance is like constantly handled in, you know, good and bad ways. Like I think I found 8 to be very frustrating as a game because there's this find an island section that I loathed.
I gave up after the first battle, if it's any consolation. The fact that...
Okay, I got farther than you. I got to the 3rd disc.
That's pretty far. The fact that you had to steal magic from enemies was so frustrating.
Oh, it's so cool after a while. There's a whole class in Final Fantasy XIV at this point where it's called the Blue Mage. I've never played it, but like the idea is you let people do attacks on you and then you learn the attacks over time. So it's sort of like that.
It's a masochist class?
Very strange. Yeah, it's just the Doro Hedoro class. Like I think Final Fantasy VIII did a pretty decent job of like, you know, picking a lane. I think Final Fantasy IX did. But I think as they got to be bigger and like a lot of games, like they were like too big to fail in a lot of ways. Square games were, especially like these you know, mainline games. Like I think you're looking at a franchise that wanted to make it, you know, always both, and right? Like it has to be everything.
And
so like it's not even a matter of like
game has to come out too. They have all of these supplemental things that they're going to have to be selling you that they're already in production.
Right.
They have the prequel movie,
correct,
and then the prequel anime that are prequels to the prequel movie, and then there's the spin-off games and the pocket games and the cell phone games and the Final Fantasy XIV event, and all of these things have to. The main thing has to sell.
Wow, kind of messed up for you to say the most important one last, but you know what? Go off. That's fine.
But these things, the main product has to be big, and they have, you know, their tie-ins with like fashion brands,
right,
and whatever else is going on, and so if that fails, then there's 5, 6, 7, 8 other things in this chain that are about to completely fall off, which I feel is probably part of what happened with Versus 13 and made it into a new game.
Well, because it's interesting too, because this really is also what particularly big AAA titles have become. You know, they're not just games anymore. They are tentpoles of a franchise that serve as an anchoring branding opportunity for other ways to monetize that IP further, right? And I mean that is not at all exclusive to, you know, big JRPGs either. That's happening. That's happening all over the place. I mean, fucking Fortnite is probably the best example of something like that. And you know, Trev, obviously you've written about how Fortnite really is maybe the best representation of like a capitalist post-scarcity society.
Sort of moment. Yeah. I mean, there's also like, I think you can point to, I don't know if you guys saw this, but in I always rag on Ubisoft and people get mad at me.
You're among
I don't know why. I
None
thought
of those
ragging on
people are in
Ubisoft
this
was
room
popular.
right now. I think you're in the clear.
Good. Thank
Well, fucking
God.
what's his name?
Spies are
Michael
everywhere.
Incel can eat shit. Fuck that guy. But other than him,
Rayman
I
will always hold a
like
place in
his
my heart.
counterpart, Michael Valsell.
wasn't that his name? The Beyond Good and Evil 2 guy? Wasn't
Yeah,
he?
when are we? Is that not happening? It's probably
No,
not
of
happening.
course it's
I
not
wish it
happening.
would.
It's
got
never
kicked the-
happening.
He got kicked the fuck out.
They're
Remember?
going to make a new trailer every 16 years, and Joseph
I'm gonna lap up that
Gordon-Levitt
garbage
is going to
every
be
time,
like,
too.
hey, submit the game art to us, because we're not actually making anything.
The pig is there. It's the pig. The photo girl.
Look
I
at
don't
the
remember
picture.
any of the
Jade
names
swears
anymore.
now.
Jade, how dare you?
It's been a long time. The game just holds like a magical place in my heart,
mine
and I
too.
can never return. But
Remember when
the
the trailer came out where they were all cussing for some reason?
Yeah, no, it's just
yeah,
The pig's name was
Hardline
Paige.
Beyond Good and Evil.
I'd almost forgotten his name. His name is Paige.
Yeah.
The pig.
Page.
Good name
Great
for
name
a
for a
pig,
pig.
actually. Honestly, it's that game has real. This is going to get us off into a garden path, but that game has real Skies of Arcadia energy,
yeah.
and I've never really been able to figure out why I think that. But those two games really exist in my mind together: Beyond Good and Evil and Skies of Arcadia.
I wanted to finish my thread though from a little bit earlier about
airships.
No.
wow, please may I please
Okay, fine.
no just about like the way that it is that tentpole franchise thing. One of the things that fascinated me the most, and the reason that the whole idea of playing as Prompto is actually a running joke for all of us,
Right.
is that if you go back and watch the announcement trailer that dropped for Final Fantasy 15 at, I don't know, fucking E3 or whatever, when it was
Yeah.
like, okay, guys,
Like
it's really
2012,
happening. It's
2013
really
or
coming
something.
out, that trailer.
Yeah.
It ends, and then it comes back and it shows a character where you have no idea who the fuck this character is, and
Yeah.
it's supposed to be like a wow, look, it's her, and you don't know who
this
she
like
is.
demo. It's this demo where they're announcing that there's a VR component to be
Right.
tied into this, and so you're first person, you're shooting guns.
Right. And then it's
And-
like, play as Prompto. And it's like, we don't,
And you can
we don't-
hear
you
the
don't know who
crowd, and then
Prompto
there's a
is.
couple people who are like cheering because they feel like they're supposed to.
It's the
But it's
funniest fucking
mostly
thing.
dead silent.
Trevor, if
no
you
one
can-
knows who Prompto is yet. The game's not
not.
fucking
Probably
out.
some guy named
come out,
Prompto.
and nobody knows any of these characters because in Final Fantasy the characters never stick around unless it's a sequel to a major
Like,
installment.
you
like
get
Gen
to
2.
fuck Ignis. Great.
I've come up with a new recipe.
So Trev, if you can find that clip and just pull the audio from right after the text comes up that announces that you can play as Prompto, and like the two people in the audience that are like, yay.
All right. Yeah.
It's the best.
That's the lesson of it. Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? Where like, so like the thought I had with Ubisoft is the most recent Far Cry game is, I'm sure it's selling great. They all do, but no one really cares
Right.
about it,
Yeah.
which is like the worst thing a video game can do. Just like Far Cry 5 did, and all the other things
Who
since
was
Far
the
Cry
villain in
2.
5? What was 5's?
The villain in
Giancarlo
5 was
Esposito,
some
right?
like.
Or is that?
That's 6.
That sucks,
Oh,
yeah.
I don't even know what number we're on.
5
That's
was
how
the
little I
cult?
care about
Is
this.
that was the cult leader?
Yeah, 5 was the
that
cult.
was the
And they were going to be alt-right, and then everyone got mad, and they were like, well, actually, they're just like,
right.
they just love
They're
guns
just
a lot.
dudes.
Now they're like smoking hash. It's like,
All right.
well, now there's nothing to, there's no tent
Which is really too bad because the idea of having to fight a domestic ultra right wing terror cell of like fucking sovereign citizens or whatever is
Yeah,
a
it's very
really
fun.
interesting
Pretty
concept.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to get it in a mainstream game, though.
Yeah, the
turns out.
closest you're going to get is Wolfenstein 2.
Which
and
fucking
that's still
rules,
gonna
by the
be
way.
German
God damn,
Nazis in America.
I love Wolfenstein
Yeah.
2, though.
Under attack by commie Nazis. But yeah, no, it's like the so like in 6, Giancarlo Esposito's the villain, and apparently if you stop playing the game, which is the only correct thing to do, Ubisoft will send you emails in the guise of Giancarlo Esposito and say
Nobody wants that.
wow, thanks for making it so easy for me. I'll rule over my island paradise like forever.
Look,
you only played for 3 hours.
Look, to be fair, Nintendo does the same shit with Animal Crossing.
Really?
If you don't play for
I
more
don't
than
check my
like
emails.
2 weeks or you're gone for a month, they'll send you an email saying your villagers are dying without you. You have to come back. The plague has spread. No, but they're basically like, they miss you.
That's just your copy.
That's just my copy.
Right.
Also, my computer starts bleeding. It's very strange. But
AJ's living in a creepy
Haunted Mario
right now.
Yes.
And
yeah, I can't believe you downloaded the Haunted Mario.
It is weird. Every
So
time I boot
messed
up
up
my
of
Animal
you.
Crossing, my character's name is Ben Drowned, and I can't figure out why.
That's a deep cut.
it's
Why
the,
does
it's
he
the
call
new
you the AJ?
archetype to enter into the sexual marketplace, Haunted Mario.
The left is too interested in creating Haunted Mario.
At T-Mobile for Business, unconventional thinking means we see things differently, so you can focus on what matters most. That's why we've become the leader in 5G, #1 in customer satisfaction, and a partner who includes 5G in every plan, so you get it all. Unconventional thinking is better for business. Open Signal awards T-Mobile as America's fastest 5G network USA. 5G user experience report July 2021. Capable device required. Coverage not available in some areas. Some uses may require certain plan or features. See T-Mobile.com. For JD Power 2020 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Cybercrime is on the rise and digital security is more important than ever. Sophos Home Antivirus will protect you against malware and viruses such as keyloggers from stealing your personal information while you shop online this season. Get protected and shop safely online this holiday season with Sophos Home. Visit sophos.com/home to learn more and get 25% off. That's Sophos, SOPHOS.com/home.
It's a real issue.
It's really the two. When it comes to the left, you can either be the fastest Mario or the haunted Mario. That's really the two ends, but both of them are equally communist.
When the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the podcast, presents at E3 next year, we're going to release a trailer with text that says, "Play as Haunted Mario."
And you know what? The four of us will clap.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think a lot of people, no, but you see, at least you have an
Well,
IP.
and that's the thing, actually.
Right? It's not
that's what's
Haunted
funny
Prompto.
about it too is right. Like if you said play, if you said play as Haunted Mario, you would get applause because again, it's like that's Mario but haunted. Presumably that means something.
Yeah.
Play as Prompto. Again, who the fuck is Prompto? I love it. I love it.
It is like that classic Simpsons moment where Gabbo, the ventriloquist dummy who competes with Krusty, comes out and the Gabbo, and someone, I think it's like Bart or someone asks like, well, what's all that about? And Homer just goes, oh, probably some guy named Gabbo.
I don't know.
Or-
Probably
yeah.
some guy named Prompto is pretty good.
One of the things
I'm gonna edit
that
that
I'm
quote, I
always interested in with games, like I don't care about achievements at all, but I do like seeing the markers. Like if a game gives you an achievement for every chapter you complete, so you can see where people start dropping out of the
Yeah,
game.
that's always interesting.
That's fun.
The completion
Yeah.
rates, at least on PlayStation 4, for Final Fantasy 15 are not terrible compared
let
to
me-
a lot of
let
other
me
games.
look
It's
at
like in the
the-
30-something%. And once
It's not a hated game.
once you
I
get
mean,
to that halfway
you're not
point
looking at
where
one
the
of
game gets worse, it's so linear and it's so driven and everything is so short that people just keep playing through to the end, essentially.
Let me
They
look
drop
at,
out during the open world segment, which is actually kind of good.
Let me look at Final Fantasy
It's funny.
15 because I'm curious to
Yeah.
see what the levels look like for the. Not let me look at Final Fantasy 15. Let me look at
Windows
Final
Edition.
Fantasy 15 Windows Edition because I'm curious to see what the playthrough completion rates look like on that.
Well, it's interesting because we're sort of critiquing Final Fantasy 15, but like this wasn't just a success financially. This was also like in many ways a success like critically for Square Enix. Like people liked the game. There was a lot of talk about whether there would ever be a good mainline, single player Final Fantasy ever again.
Especially after 13.
Yeah.
Just like
Right, exactly.
But I mean, its rating is not. I don't ever know how to read. You know, like if you look at like the Metacritic roundup, it's like 83%, whereas like Cyberpunk got, you know, a couple points higher than that and was seen as a disaster.
Yeah, Metacritic doesn't tell you much.
Yeah.
But most of the reviews are generally positive. But, you know, there is that weird thing where people are like, I kind of didn't like this game. 80%.
Well, especially with like big games like that. But I mean, like, you know, it is funny looking ahead at 16 because 16 is not at all like 15. Like it doesn't have anything in common with 15. It looks like it's back to sort of like high fantasy in a lot of ways. They brought in the director of Final Fantasy 14, or at least the good parts of Final Fantasy 14, like the Final Fantasy 14 2.0 and onward, to do it. Like, it feels like they're departing from 15 really fast, which is like,
well, it seems like
it's an odd
something
feeling.
happened. Like, I mean, not just Tetsuya Nomura leaving a couple years before they ship the game, right? And then Hajime Tabata comes in and he finishes it up after he was like a sort of co-director, assistant director, and after he had done some of the like mobile games and things like that. He comes in, they kind of get the game wrapped up, which I think is part of why the story is what it is that they were just like tying it together to make the final thing. They get the first set of DLC out, and then they're going to do a whole batch of 4 more. And then before the first one goes, Tabata's gone. He leaves. He like starts a new studio in March of 2018 within Square, and then he's gone by like August. And so then by 2019, they get Arden out because it was probably already in the works. And so they, you know, finish it up and it's actually really good. And the next 3 DLC got put in a novel. And the novel came out this year. But like they're just done. They've cut off Final Fantasy 15. They've cut off the people who made it. And they're just, you know, plowing forward to the next thing. And I guess plowing backwards a little bit, too, to make more stuff for 14, because that seems like it's picked up even more in the last couple of years.
Yeah. And
there's another X-Pack coming out for it.
Yeah,
well,
wild.
and truthfully, just reading what the other episodes were going to be, I'm fine that they didn't end up making them. They seem to like everything that I liked about Arden.
Yeah.
They were throwing out, and we're just going back to what they did with Gladios and Prompto and Ignis.
The strengths of the DLC is that you actually started to get a real sense of what was going on. Not just in the large, like, ooh, here's how the kingdoms actually relate to each other and the gods and whatever, but also you get a real sense of emotional stakes in individual scenes, which the main game keeps trying to do but can't ever land.
Except for maybe that one scene where Prompto and Noctis are sitting on top of an inn, and Prompto's
and
like,
they're talking about.
I feel like I've always just been left out, and I'm really sad all the time. And Noctis is like, hey, I'm a king. I wouldn't love a loser. And Prompto's like, I feel instantly better. And then it's never brought up again.
Yeah.
Until we
so
find out that he's
wonderful.
Sephiroth? Is that what the DLC like posits? Is that Prompto is secretly Sephiroth?
No,
Wait,
I think he's just like a normal person clone, like a Rossum's Universal Robots kind of situation.
Yeah, not every clone is Sephiroth.
Yeah.
Some clones are clouds.
AJ,
This is a
educate
common
yourself.
misperception.
Do better.
I'm sorry. Well, look, some are Cloud, you know, and then some are just dudes in robes that have numbers.
Some are Zack.
That's, I mean, I feel like
But
that's not
Arden
the
works
biggest.
best because Arden actually dropped the lore on you, and you're like, oh, so that's what was happening the whole time.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it
You
took-
just go
it
into
took
a room and
15
you just
minutes
read a
to
bunch of
learn it.
things. You're like, great, I'm
And
on board.
but the way the next DLCs were going to go was they were going to change the entire story into some sort of alternate timeline thing, which seems completely at odds with thematically what they're trying to do in the main game, which is just you actually have no choice and you have no idea what's going on, and everything that happens to you was someone else's decision a long time ago, which when you start to get a sense of it is actually pretty great. It's just
super interesting.
never it just like a cutscene is going on and I would just be yelling at my TV just going, I don't know who you are. What's happening right now? What is this current situation that we're in?
I think, like, you know, like one of the things, so you say going back to 14, and definitely numbers wise, that's true. But like in terms of 15 versus 14, but the like the buzz around 14 has just gotten steadily bigger since A Realm Reborn, and like A Realm Reborn wasn't great. It's fine. It's the first one where Yoshitaka Yamada. They always call him Yoshi P, so I always get worried that that's not his real name. But anyway, the current director comes on, and Amano comes on and basically says like, we gotta scrap this. This is bad. Like we're losing incredible amounts of money, and this game just sucks. And scraps it, comes up with a new thing, and then all the X packs after that, Heavensward, Stormblood, and now Shadowbringers, have been like, progressively people have really liked them a lot. They basically get a chance to do exactly what I think you're really intelligently pointing out doesn't get done in 15 until it's like, okay, we're here. Like, what do we do with these DLCs? Yeah. Which is, it gets to pivot, right? Like, it gets to be like, yeah, we focused a lot on this thing. Yeah. I'd like to do this thing now. And so, like, okay, so like A Realm Reborn focused a lot on these ideas of primals, which are like, the game's version of summons, effectively. I'm like, okay, don't really want to do anything with them in the Empire anymore. Why don't we do something in the North with dragons? I'm like, all right, cool. I just did a lot with dragons. Don't want to do that anymore. Why don't we do like a thing in the desert? All right, cool. Like, I'm kind of sick of this whole world. Well, why don't we just make it go to another world? Great. For one X-Pack, that's wonderful. And so, like, they were thinking, a lot of people were thinking that Endwalker, the X-Pack that's coming out at the end of this month, was going to be the last one, right? Like the last Final Fantasy 14 expansion, which made me very sad. And got me back to my old, like, 12-year-old ways of like looking up news, being like Final Fantasy 14 over news ? It really would have been a blessing. I could have played something else, but podcast would have. I'm stuck. But the Endwalker, they just said it's going to be the end of this story, and I think like that's not just Snow. Like, even though Amana's going on to do 16 as well, like, it's clear to me that the whole idea with 14 now is, okay, we'll get done with this main story, and then we can just like kind of do what we want. Any expansion can be whatever we want it to be. And in some ways, like, the version of Final Fantasy we're talking about now, where like, yeah, you can't fail on these big things. You have to take a huge swing, and it has to be a huge hit every time. Yeah. Works better when you have a subscriber base that loves their characters, wants to stay in that world, wants to sort of be attached to that world, and will play, whatever's in it.
That's interesting too. To that point about like really building a world that people love, because that was what Overwatch was supposed to be. Just moving. This is a bit of a pivot here, but it's an interesting thing to me. This idea of like building a participatory, and Final Fantasy 14 is an MMO. It is one of the MMO Final Fantasies, or is it single player?
Yeah,
yeah.
11.
Yeah.
No, it's MMO. It's very much.
It is MMO. Yeah. I think, like you said, the thing about subscriber base, the thing about online games is that you can continue to monetize these characters, but it's really fucking hard, because not only do you have to continue delivering content, you also have to be putting up with fans who get really, really bitchy about everything all of the time. Overwatch is a little bit different because it is obviously a competitive first-person shooter as opposed to an RPG. But the idea there
there are first-person shooter elements to the Prompto episode.
Well, I think
the
biggest weakness of Overwatch is that you can't play as Prompto.
Exactly.
Yes.
If
at the next E3 they announced you could play as Prompto in Overwatch, flying off the shelves.
It was a real mistake when they had that in the first trailer
Prompto
for Overwatch
confirmed for Heroes 38. No,
imagine if Prompto flew out of the keyhole in the Smash reveal, and it's like Prompto's finally come home.
Prompto joins the fight.
Like they show Sora, but you're not going to play as Sora because you can play as Prompto, and everyone would be so excited by that.
Sora's limp body falls to the earth, and it's good. Prompto with a sniper rifle saying, "I'm here."
But yeah, I mean, you have to, in order for a game to work, I think, particularly one that is supposed to have a fan base that gets really devoted to it. It does come down to characters first and foremost. I really do believe that.
Well, no, you're not wrong. Like the characters in 14 are like extremely like the ones you keep
Right.
running into. The Scions are sort of your friends. Like they're extremely compelling. I think like there is this mix now, and I don't think it's necessarily a healthy thing because we lose out on a lot of short, smaller narratives and stuff like that are contained. But like it's not a surprise that some of the most engaging, like I'll talk to like my friend Dia about Final Fantasy 14, and we have like fairly, I wouldn't say like diametrically opposed opinions on the main story quest, but she's definitely less big on it than I am. But like, it's still fun to play that game. Like,
Right.
it's just like, even if you don't like what you're doing quest wise, it's like, oh, cool. Like I can go hang out around all these people that are doing weird stuff, or like, oh, there's a social element or whatever. Like it is that many screens all at once sort of thing.
It's as Reggie once famously said, the game is fun. If it's not fun, why bother?
Yeah.
That's Reggie for Reggie in the Full Effect,
Yeah,
right?
correct, yeah. That is Reggie Fils-Aimé, former president of Nintendo of America. You might have heard
Yeah,
of him.
and I think
now
one
it's
of the big
Doug
problems
Bowser.
with 15 is that like it's just not fun to play.
Sure.
For most of it, you're supposed to hold one button, the circle button.
Yeah.
Just
You
forever.
just hold it.
and
you
then
just-
you win. But then that's not even true because they don't give you a.
Sometimes your character does like weird things. They just like jump around the enemy instead of hitting them properly.
Yeah, they do like a Kingdom Hearts like turn around, like fly into the air thing, but sometimes we'll just miss them. Like even when you're locked on, you'll sometimes just like dart off in a different direction. And also your block and dodge button are the same button. And if you don't hit the block button in the millisecond of time that you have to hit it, you will just fly off the screen.
When I was playing the Ignis,
no rhyme or reason to the dodge mechanic.
when I was playing the Ignis DLC, it kept making the block button prompt kept showing up after I got hit every single time.
That's a real problem too.
And it's so
Block
busy, you
button
just can't
prompt,
tell what's going on. You can't tell what's going on most of the time, but the game doesn't really want you to because it just wants you to hold circle. But then sometimes things are just going to go horribly, horribly wrong.
And if you're going to do a game and if you are going to do that mechanic, you should at least make the player feel really powerful by holding circle. Like you should be able to like really wreck shit up.
That's what
which
makes
is why I
Every
love
enemy
Arden
is
so
like a
much.
sponge.
They will not die. Level 14 creatures. I'm level like 60, and I'm like toothpicking them. Like it's just the tiniest of amounts.
The whole, like, hold the
Adamantoise is a
button
30-hour
down.
battle. Like what are we doing here?
The whole like hold the button down and win, but you still feel powerful doing it. Like that's what games like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry do so well, right?
Yeah.
They're not full-on fighting games. You don't have to be pulling these incredibly complex combos necessarily. You can win by, button mashing basically.
Yeah.
But the whole time it feels
It feels
good.
great. Yeah.
Feels amazing.
And my issue with like the Final Fantasy battle system, which I do think kind of worked in Chrono Trigger, but maybe that's just because I was playing on DS. And the system where it has the little meter that goes across. That
There
is
are Final
only,
Fantasy fans
only
banging
in
on
Final
Brian's
Fantasy
windows.
and
They are
Chrono
holding
Trigger.
torches
Like,
This is
come
like-
on,
and
come on.
pitchforks.
I'm talking about a real system here.
If anyone could see my face here, it's so bad.
You're doing
I'm sorry.
the
This is like-
famous Picard facepalm right now.
Oh God, there are Final Fantasy fans outside of Trevor's window too.
Okay, if you're
and they
going
are
to tell me
banging,
that the
they have
battle
pitchforks.
mechanics in Chrono Trigger are not
They're
like the
also
battle
agreeing
mechanics
with me.
in Final Fantasy 4 and onward, what are we doing here? They're using that same system
what we're
beyond just
doing is
simple
seemingly-
turn-based battling, right?
It's like you saw Mario and you're like, these games where you run across the screen and kind of jump sometimes, they're all Mario.
No,
to me.
because
These are all
Sonic the
spin-offs.
Hedgehog is
No.
Mario to me.
Because
the
the
Olympic
Final
games.
Fantasy battle system is distinct from the one in Dragon Quest or Pokemon or Tales, of course,
But it's-
where they try to combine the live action component with turn-based, and that's also present in Chrono Trigger, right? I'm not trying to make this whole thing a treatise about Chrono Trigger. I'm just talking about this battle mechanic.
So what I would say there, if you want to make that argument, what I would say is you're talking about a live action element to it, which like is something a lot of RPGs gleamed onto when like games started doing it. I'm actually going to do the cardinal sin and research right now and see. Let's see when.
By the way, for my money,
First.
the best implementation of a real-time combat mechanic in a turn-based RPG is the Mario and Luigi games.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We're
So
yeah,
great.
it's contingent on each turn, but you can still make your choices without having to worry about other people attacking you
Right.
beforehand, which is what is frustrating about the Final Fantasy IV onward battle system. But what I do think is interesting is that Square shows a certain discomfort with just doing the thing that they could have been doing this whole time, which is just doing normal turn-based battling. And 15, I think, shows an even further discomfort with trying to go into like a normal real-time system. And they're expanding off of what was being done in 12 a little bit. I say having only played a tiny bit of 12. But they don't want to be like another game. It's like they're insistent on being like, no, we have to do something different because we're Final Fantasy. We cannot be following this mechanic of another system. So we're going to make a system where you hold the button down the whole time.
That's kind of a thing, though. Like it's like heavy as the head that wears the crown, right? Like Final Fantasy is, for better or for worse, still the Cadillac of RPGs. You know what I
The
mean?
regalia
Like,
in this case.
there's
It seems like Dragon Quest, for some reason, does not have that same kind of weight put on it.
Well, in America, Dragon Quest is huge.
It is huge in Japan, but it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like it's struggling as much with that weight. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're
I
saying.
think
Yeah.
that Dragon Quest is
I
more
think the other
comfortable
thing-
with what it is. Honestly.
Yeah.
I think the other thing about Final Fantasy, in looking at Final Fantasy 15, especially if you're thinking about combat mechanics, is that you're still dealing with this issue of, and I don't, no defense of Final Fantasy 15 here in terms of combat, which like no one seems to really like. Like I don't think it's just us, but like the Final Fantasy 7 remake is essentially built off of that same system and is like universally loved. Like people love that system. People love playing Final Fantasy 7 remake and the fighting.
Yeah.
In it. Well, not universally is probably strong, but like people seem to really like it, right? And like.
I sure do.
I think that again is like Square just has to roll out these games and like the way they're doing it, they're like, let's get it out there. And people are just like, I don't think this is really ready for prime time, guys. Like we'll figure it out by the next time we remake Final Fantasy 7.
Yeah.
Well, and that's really interesting too, because it kind of segues a little bit into a point I wanted to make about Final Fantasy, because I don't think I didn't realize that my two co-hosts didn't like the series as much as I do.
Don't worry, I'm there with you.
Yeah,
I think it's lovely.
I think that Final Fantasy is actually what I think all art should be, which is big swings and occasionally just. And also, okay, so Final Fantasy VII, I recently played for the first time, like last year during the pandemic. I bought all of the Final Fantasy games from 7 on, and I started playing through them. As I said, I abandoned 8 after the first battle. And I love 9, and I'm working my way through 9 right now, and it's just it's really fun, and I love it. But
It's a
7,
charming game.
It's really charming. But 7, I was so surprised to find, is such a freaking mess. They were like, I don't want to make one video game. I want to make every video game at once. And in spite of that mess, it still somehow hangs together and creates this bizarre, weird, beautiful tapestry of a game that
It's a wild game.
Yeah, that I actually, and I really love the remake as well for being like, hey, everything you thought you knew about this, we're not beholden to that anymore. We can do whatever we want because this is just an entirely different, universe. I guess spoilers for Final Fantasy VII remake. But even 15,
how dare you?
As much,
first off,
yeah, sorry. As much as I do not like 15 and think it does not work on so many levels, it at least is trying so many new things in an industry that is so reliant on doing the same thing over and over. Hi, Assassin's Creed, over and over and over again.
Ubisoft, let's go.
Ubisoft, what's up?
Oh, got to cut off the podcast now. I got some cease and desists.
Just tell them to send the letters to us this time.
I don't mean to alarm anyone, but Rayman is here, and he is revving up his fist. He can get me from across the room. He has no limbs. No,
he's
he's
broken.
a broken man. But yeah, So I'm always excited for a new Final Fantasy because I'm always excited to see what just chaos they're going to unleash upon my system. In a way that, we were talking about Death Stranding earlier. Like every time Kojima comes out with a new game, it's like, what the fuck is this going to be?
I'm always going to play it. Like,
Yeah.
And 15 is such an appealing game. Like, it looks really fucking nice. The boys are pretty. The land is pretty. You have a nice car. I like the car. You don't do much with the car, but I like the car.
Why can you not go off-road?
What's not to like about the Regalia?
You can fly and then immediately crash and die.
You can fly in the post-game, and if any game has never warranted a post-game, it's Final Fantasy 15.
I didn't spend hours in the Golden Saucer trying to win tickets to purchase the Regalia in an MMO without liking it.
AJ, I think your point about the throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks is one that's well made, and I think maybe just thinking about like my opinion about Final Fantasy as a series, part of it might honestly come down to the fact that I don't think I like the RPG genre as much as you do. But when I think about the games similarly that I am the most sort of passionate about and the ones that are most interesting to me, similarly, they are the games that really try something new. That's why like Cruelty Squad was one of the most interesting games of the year for me. It's a wild game. I think that it's like at this point, all of the praise for it is maybe a little overwrought. Like, it is an interesting game that does a lot of interesting stuff. Sometimes it succeeds.
Welcome to video game discourse.
Exactly. Like any honest approach to Cruelty Squad will see, like some of it succeeds, some of it fails, but at the end of the day, it does stuff and most importantly makes you feel things that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise feel. By the way, but I will say, Final Fantasy X for me. In terms of the Final Fantasies that left the biggest mark on me, that's the one for me.
Well. The Death of God narrative resonates.
I know, surprise.
With Joshua Bowerman. I can't believe it. This is so shocking.
Also, I'm just in love with both Yuna and Riku. So
I think it's
cool how you're wearing Oron's clothes right now, while we're talking.
Well,
he's been trying to practice how to laugh this whole. Oh God, that's uncanny.
How in the last like 6 years, what did this come out in 2015? We've had a number of really high-profile games where the story is botched in a lot of really interesting ways. With Cyberpunk coming out, with Death Stranding, where there's so many, there's terrible pacing. Death Stranding has like half of its cutscenes after you get to the West Coast.
Right. And it's Kojima,
just like,
so all
I
of
already
those
did
fucking
everything, and now I have to find out that this woman who I've never really had any solid idea of who she is, Twist, she's actually also the president,
right?
And now I'm going to make my way back. And I'm also dead for a while, and I'm turning blue.
Setting all of the stupid like plot twists and pacing aside, also it's a Hideo Kojima game, so all of the cutscenes are like 5 hours long.
Yeah.
Well, except for the best cutscene in the game, which is when Mads Mikkelsen looks straight into camera and says, "It's Daddy."
That is actually a very brief scene.
That's short because if it was longer, everyone would just watch it all the time and be insufferable
and
about
Cyberpunk
it.
has the same...
Watching this 5%?
And Cyberpunk has the same thing where it's like there's so much exposition, but none of it is put into describing or explaining the thing that you actually care about. It's just like they've spent so much time on, and Death Stranding does this, where they're just describing all these other things that shouldn't be described, and then the things that you kind of should know about, you never really learn about. But I don't think any of them have failed as spectacularly moment by moment as Final Fantasy 15, which has all the same kind of pacing issues, but you just have someone comes on screen and people talk to him like they know him already, but he actually hasn't shown up before. Or when you get Prompto back in the main story and he's going on and on about the cloning thing. And it's like, was I supposed to know that he was a clone from the beginning? Because he's just talking about it right now. And it seems like all the party knows that too. And then you play the Prompto DLC, and it's him slowly finding out that he's a clone.
Yeah. Kind of messed up that you're like angry at Prompto for processing in that way.
Yeah.
Don't try to normalize Prompto's trauma. That's not nice.
Prompto.
I think it's funny you say that because like I think you're right, and I also think there's been like, and this might be part of the reason we see moving away from stories like 15 and indeed stories like Death Stranding in some ways too. Stuff like Nier Automata and the sort of like resurgence of the old Nier games with the remake. I mean, that's the one that's coming to mind, but there are plenty like that have been these sort of like momentary blips, not momentary blips, but these sort of things that should have been, back burner, like second tier stuff that have become huge, right? Like Nier Automata is a huge game, and no one, I think, at Square Enix would have like bet you that it would be. Yeah, like, I mean, it wasn't. I'm sure they're thrilled. I doubt they thought that
they were really banking on the Quiet Man. They're like,
yes,
this is going to be our meal ticket.
Yeah. We're doing a 3-hour video essay on The Quiet Man.
No, don't do that to yourself. Good. But yeah, I mean, like it's interesting that now we're still seeing like bloated AAA games for sure, but there is this sense of like, oh, what if we can tap into that like art market that got Nier Automata big, or like what if we could like maybe we should talk to these people who can make us a hot like 30 to 40 hour game or something, as opposed to we need a narrative that just like sits in your belly like London Broil all night. I don't know. Like it's an interesting shift in the market. I don't think it's going to last because people are going to, at the first time one of these games fails, they're going to immediately go back to it. But Brian, your point about Cyberpunk made me think. I was when I'm at work, I like to listen to really bad scary stories on YouTube that people animate. They're really stupid, and they just kind of like go in and out of my mind like. Yeah, I mean, you can just look up like animated scary stories. They're all very bad.
Like bad as in ineptly told, or like what is it that makes them bad?
I mean, the animation's not great, but they're doing their best there.
Okay.
I mean, mostly these people just like write stories, and sometimes they get retold if they're being reused. They get the same people off Fiverr to do it, so you hear the same voices all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. How do I audition
it's wild.
to get one of those roles?
You should have gotten it. You're better than a lot of those people. But anyway, like I mean, it's fine. I'm not really in it for like the content. They're all the same story after a while. But there was one I remember from Dr. No Sleep that I just was like, I remember it and his handle.
Are these from the No Sleep subreddit? Mostly,
sometimes,
like
yeah.
Yeah, okay. I understand what you're talking about then. I'm sorry.
They're sort of like creepypastas
taking time away from your podcast to clarify for me what a scary story is. But
so since the dawn of Josh, human beings have
yeah, thanks.
See, the rush of adrenaline to the head is actually pleasing for several people who listen to these stories, Josh.
Right.
And
in feudal Japan, there was a tradition
down,
known as Hyaku Monogatari Kaidankai, where you would sit around.
Brian,
and
enough people have watched the Pulse video, okay? Send at least some people to the Quest one. Jesus Christ. Y'all got to play Final Fantasy VII. I had to play Quest 64 90 times, okay? Let me have this.
But bottom line,
that.
yes, not good scary stories.
Yeah, but it's fine. It doesn't really matter. Like I put them on because they're background noise, right? And I focus on anything if it's like remotely interesting, even if so like I can't listen to anything that is interesting. So like there was one though that was it was supposed to be like a Cyberpunk 2077 scary story, like set in the world of it.
Oh, amazing.
And it was immediately unlistenable because they used the Cyberpunk exposition, and they were just like, I live in Night City. In this city, corporations control everything. We have an internet that's called this, and in this, people are called that. And I was like, people really think this is good because like, they're seeing like CD Projekt Red do it. This is horrible. And like you're right, like that kind of exposition is just death, and it's like it's horrible.
Well, I would have loved any and all of that exposition in 15. Like just like even like a little bit of like a crumbling of it.
So many of the conversations, like even in the first half of the game,
remember Dino?
Are just about like
remember
the
Dino,
king that
the
you don't
New
see.
York reporter that just shows up midway through and makes you go get a mineral for him, and you encounter a literal bald eagle, and you're like, we get it. The open world is America. We know.
But they're talking about kings you don't see or the princess you're supposed to marry. And the only information you can actually get on them is in like the dossier, which is like 3 menus deep. And then you read it and it tells you nothing. It's like
you are supposed to marry a princess.
The loading screens all show like cities you'll never visit. And they give you information where you don't know the text on the screen if it's what led to the scene you just watched, or explaining the scene itself, or explaining where you're going once this loading screen ends.
It's exposition by riddles, and I just don't have the brain space.
And it's amazing. And what it means is like there was just a lot of incomplete stuff. There was so much stuff getting thrown out constantly because that's what happens when you make a game for 10 years. It means that you're actually getting rid of the
extra
constant
stuff.
rewrites.
Yeah.
Right. It's like Resident Evil 4, right? There was like a completely different game that they just threw out and then made this thing about evil Spaniards. And that's what they should have done with Final Fantasy 15. If it was all about evil Spaniards, I'd be able to follow it.
But also, like, again, RE4 actually coheres, right? Like, it's the goofiness suits the game overall because it's also a very action-oriented title, and so that driving action and sort of the heightened nature of the world interact with each other really, really nicely. Even as it gets kind of like weird toward the end, it still makes sense.
And once you get to the end of Final Fantasy 15, you lose the dude's rock. You lose your friends. You get separated from them on the train. Then you get separated from them again in the really long chapter with all the jump scares. And then you finally get back together. And then you get separated from them for 10 years. And you end up in a world of night, like immediately after reuniting with them. And then you reunite with them again. And then you get separated again to fight Arden at the last moment. And it's like, what about Dude's Rock? That was the game. The game was Dude's Rock.
The opening song is Stand By Me.
Right.
And you make them not stand by me. Let them stand by me.
This will be my final comment on the game because I don't want to put a hat on a hat with my commentary. I won't cut you guys off, but I will say this is the only reason that the game falls off is because they chose not to make it just about friends or make it like a gay romance game. There's like the fact that the princess was there means that like your friends have to go away in Final Fantasy logic, and like it's like, but the whole game's about how important my friends are. Like, no choices. It can't just be my friends, and it can't be my husband. It has to be. We have to leave them behind on the train.
And all we really want to do is play as Prompto.
Yep. Right.
Play as Prompto.
That's all anybody wants to do.
So before we close up shop, and by way of final thoughts, questions, any final thoughts you have on Final Fantasy 15 plus your favorite game? What we've talked about a game that's sort of like promising and disappointing. What's your like? It doesn't have to be the one. Don't worry, I won't hold you to it. But like a favorite game, let's say one that has meant a lot to you. So I'll start. I'll go clockwise on my own screen, which means I have to start with myself. But then I have to go down. I'll just swap that. I'll start with Josh.
Cool. So, I mean, in terms of like games that really deliver on what they promise in an interesting way, you mean like that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. Whatever it means to you.
Whatever it means for well,
yeah, like the game that was meaningful to you. Yeah.
Definitely. So there's really two that pop to mind immediately, and those are Deus Ex and Thief 2. And at some point, I know, Trev, we've talked about, like, I want to come on and talk about Thief 2 and Shock 2 and, like, the Looking Glass games and what they did, both for the immersive sim genre and just for gaming in general. The first time that I played Deus Ex was actually in college. And so that was at this point. First time I played it was probably about 12 years ago or so, 12, 13 years ago. And it was the first time that I played a game where it was like, oh, you could just kind of do whatever you want. And the developers have given you a toolkit that you can play around with based on what makes the most sense for you in terms of how you want to solve the problems that the level design presents. That to me is what makes games exciting, is when you, as the player, learn the story and interact with the characters through the gameplay that is happening, and that the gameplay is emergent based on how it is that you prefer to play. I hate nothing more than games that railroad you down one specific path and make you do things one specific way. And so the freedom of Deus Ex was a real revelation for me. And then I played Thief 2 only like, I think less than a year ago, both Thief 2 and Shock 2. And both of those games absolutely knocked my fucking socks off. And then more recently, Prey in that same vein. Fucking great game.
Yeah, Prey's a Shock game for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. All right, continuing clockwise. Actually, I'm just going to do reverse clockwise because it makes it more straightforward. Reverse clockwise is Brian.
Okay. So if I get the chance to pick two as well, probably the one like legacy
only
game
Josh.
that I always that I talk about.
That's my special privilege as
like,
producer of Trevor's shows. I get two games.
The one that has a particular like sentimental value to me is Link's Awakening, which I think it in part shows an era of game development that doesn't really exist anymore, because you could make your main games on the consoles and then you can make these side games where no one has any expectations whatsoever of what you're going to fucking make on a Game Boy. And because of that, people could branch out in these really new, unique ways with simplified gameplay and figuring out the most that they could do with these limited structures. And Link's Awakening embodied all of that. I think it made one of the most compelling Zelda worlds in the way that you constantly are unfolding and unlocking it, and then it just completely fucking rips it away from you. Like, I think it was the very first game I ever actually managed to beat as a kid. And that moment where it's like... What a
crushing game to beat.
Yeah. Ugh. And you get to the end and the Windfish is like, let's wake up. And you're like, okay. The whole screen goes white. And you just watch everyone that you met and whose lives you improved, or who you turned back from a raccoon or whatever, and now they're just gone. And the game doesn't tell you what to think about that exactly. It's just what happens. And then more recently, as far as the stuff I've played in the last couple years throughout the pandemic, and this is a very basic sort of answer, it seems, but Fallout New Vegas really opened my eyes to, because so much of my work in the last 6 years has been in immersive theater as a writer and actor, really opened my eyes to how you can design a story that remains modular and remains changeable based on the action of the player from the beginning to the end, and how to get the ideas across and how to fully transform the world that you are in as you're getting through it. So those are my answers.
Yeah, no, fantastic answers. Yeah, love it. And I never want to add on people's answers like this. Like there's no yes-anding you here. And last but not least, AJ.
Yeah. So my two games really focus on time and use time in very interesting ways. The first
That's
one.
funny. Neither of the other ones did. All of your games dealt with time in some way.
Yeah, no, but these like explicitly are as like a mechanic. Like it is as a gameplay mechanic, and I think the first one is Majora's Mask, because I think it actually deals. It feels very much like Link's Awakening in that it is Link processing trauma, but through a like fictional world. Like he's transported to this other world, and in that one, it's much more like clearly a dream, where Termina feels more real, like he has been transformed to a different dimension that's just being destroyed over and over again. And it's such a goopy, weird, like gross kind of game, which is something that like they had such a limited amount of time. Like just learning about the development of that game is just so mind-boggling that they had like a year and they just use all the, and that's why everything repeated from Ocarina of Time, but it actually comments so beautifully on Ocarina of Time and about Link losing his best friend, basically.
Yeah.
And you know, God, I will never forget entering the moon and seeing that field and that tree and those kids running around with the boss masks around the tree. I will never forget that moment. Like, it is seared into my mind of what you could do with video games. And then the second one is the Prince of Persia trilogy, because I think a lot of people talk about Sands of Time because it's an amazing game, and I love Sands of Time. It's so fun and quippy and an utter delight to play, and the game mechanic of rewinding time was so revolutionary. It's great. But Two Thrones, the Two Princes, or the Two Thrones, I think, is the third one in that series, and that one has, I think, the greatest ending of any video game story I've ever seen. The fact that it loops in on itself and begins the story of Sands of Time again, but also is a game about reckoning with the brutality of the video game industry and developing a game, and how with Warrior Within they had to like give in to market pressures to make a God of War clone, but how what they really wanted to make was just another Prince of Persia game. And then what they did, instead of like, you know, retconning the second game is, oh, that never happened, this angry like hardcore prince with the boobs and the blood, actually
I did love his tits in the second game. They were gorgeous.
Impeccable tits. But in Two Thrones, they just made them fight each other. And it was like, it was a series reckoning with itself, but not in a way that felt too like meta, like them looking at you being like, do you get it? It's just like, it really felt like a character-driven like fight for the soul of that franchise. And I thought it was beautiful. Did you also want our thoughts about Final Fantasy 15, or should we? I don't have to.
You're welcome. If you have any left, you're welcome to give them to me.
I guess all I really want to say about Final Fantasy 15 is that I didn't like this meal, but when Final Fantasy 16 trailer played, Square said, "I've come up with a new recipe, and I'm going to eat the shit out of it."
I have new recipe. I have a new recipe. The new recipe is you can play as Prom.
Hell yeah! Let's go! Finally! Let's go!
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on, guys. I so appreciate
Thank you
it.
for having us.
Where
Thanks for having
can
us, Trevor.
people find all of you?
Well,
In the woods.
actually, as of today, we have launched our website. At least it's great. It's fucking cool. Actually, you can go to worstpossible.world, and there's links to all
Also,
our shit there.
worstofallpossibleworlds.com, right?
Yes,
And we're
worstofallpossibleworlds.com redirects to worstpossible.world. But either way, it'll take you to a truly delightful and very beautiful website that has links to all of our stuff. And of course, we are on Patreon. That's the way that
we're on Twitter. If you just find, the Worst of All Possible Worlds, TWOAPW.
Yep.
You'll find us on Twitter and then branch out. I'm at Spock's Brian. Josh is at Bosch J. AJ is at the Fuzzy Mask, or at
That's
the Fuzzy Mask.
That's the Fuzzy Mask. Yeah.
Fuzzy Mask. That's
Very
where we
nice. Excellent. Well, definitely listen. It's a great podcast. I've not just saying that because I like anything that's got guests on, as it speaks well to me as a person who knows and has him on the show. No, it's great. You guys do really good work. I will, once I come up with something that I know about, I'll be happy. I'll be forcing Josh
Absolutely.
to let
You can always come
anytime,
talk about
and we
Adventures
could
in Odyssey.
Yeah, we could
That's
always
true.
just force feed
There
you
you
some
go.
Adventures in Odyssey episodes.
you will suffer psychic damage though, so like it's kind of up to you. Like we can talk about something you love, or we can force feed you something that you are going to hate.
Yeah.
I mean, I do like talking about things I hate.
Yeah.
I could also, a good bit would be if I came on and I had played all of Etrian Odyssey. And I thought that's what you said. And like just had a lot to say about Etrian Odyssey.
Honestly, we could find some parallels. I think we could probably find some parallels in there. You go through the no-no door, anything's possible.
Yep.
I want to watch this show now. All right. Well, guys, please come back anytime. And thanks so much for being here.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. See you.
Hey, thanks for listening to No Cartridge. If you'd like to support us further, please consider going to patreon.com/nocartridge or for a one-time donation, paypal.me/Hegelbon, Hegelbon. It's really, really helpful for all of us to be able to support the many people who make the show, myself included, but also our producers and various co-hosts and writers and artists. Thank you so much for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, any of those things that would let other people get the quality video game analysis that you've grown accustomed to.
At T-Mobile for Business, unconventional thinking means we see things differently, so you can focus on what matters most. That's why we've become the leader in 5G, #1 in customer satisfaction, and a partner who includes 5G in every plan, so you get it all. Unconventional thinking is better for business. Open Signal awards T-Mobile as America's fastest 5G network USA. 5G user experience report July 2021. Capable device required. Coverage not available in some areas. Some uses may require certain plan features. See T-Mobile.com. For JD Power 2020 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Cybercrime is on the rise and digital security is more important than ever. Sophos Home Antivirus will protect you against malware and viruses such as keyloggers from stealing your personal information while you shop online this season. Get protected and shop safely online this holiday season with Sophos Home. Visit sophos.com/home to learn more and get 25% off. That's Sophos, SOPHOS.com/home.